Imagine being left behind, not by enemies, not by predators, but by your own family. 40,000 years ago, that wasn't heartbreak. It was almost certainly a death sentence. For most of human history, this wasn't cruelty. It was survival. If you were injured, sick, or too old to walk, sometimes your tribe had only one option left. Leave you behind. That sounds horrifying today. But 40,000 years ago, it might have been the difference between 5 people dying or 50. Let's get into it. To understand why this happened, you first have to understand just how fragile hunter-gatherer life really was. Small bands, maybe 30 to 50 people, constantly on the move, following herds, fleeing winters, chasing rivers that hadn't frozen yet. There was no surplus food, no stockpiles, no safety net of any kind. Every single person in the group had to pull their weight, or the whole group was at risk. A hunter who couldn't run, a mother who couldn't keep walking, an elder who couldn't keep pace. In the harshest seasons, they became something colder than a person. They became a math problem. Feed them and risk starving everyone. Leave them, and the rest might just survive the winter. Now, this wasn't written down anywhere as a rule. There was no council sitting around deciding who lives and who doesn't. It was instinct, environment, and brutal necessity, all colliding at once. And evidence of this exists all over the world. Anthropologists studying modern-day hunter-gatherer groups, the Inuit, the Hadza, the Aché of Paraguay, have documented something pretty disturbing. In times of extreme famine, the sick, the elderly, and sometimes even infants were left behind, not out of hatred, out of arithmetic. A study from the 1970s on the Aché found that abandoning the elderly during forced migrations wasn't just something that happened quietly. In some cases, it was actually expected. But here's where it gets stranger. This wasn't universal, and that's the mystery. Because other ancient sites tell a completely different story. In Iraq, archaeologists uncovered a Neanderthal skeleton known as Shanidar 1. This man lived around 45,000 years ago. He was missing an arm. He was partially blind. He likely couldn't hunt, couldn't see threats coming, couldn't even fully feed himself. And yet, he lived for years after his injuries. Years. Someone fed him. Someone protected him. Someone carried the supplies he could no longer gather on his own. This one skeleton rewrote what we thought we knew about prehistoric humans. It suggests that even in brutal environments, some tribes chose compassion over efficiency. So which one is true? Did ancient humans abandon the weak, or did they care for them? The unsettling answer is both. It depended on circumstance. It depended on resources. It depended on how close to starvation the group actually was. When food was available, the disabled, the sick, and the elderly were often protected, fed, and even prioritized. Elders carried memory. They knew which berries were poisonous, which rivers froze early, which mountain pass had killed travelers 10 winters before. That knowledge could save an entire tribe. So losing an elder wasn't just an emotional loss. It was the deletion of a survival manual. But when famine hit hard enough, when there wasn't enough meat to last the week, when the migration stretched on for days without rest, the calculation flipped. And the tribe that hesitated too long sometimes didn't survive at all. This is where things get dark. Some researchers studying Arctic indigenous groups recorded oral histories describing cenocide, the abandonment of the elderly during the harshest winters, not as murder, but as a last resort, sometimes even requested by the elder themselves. Just imagine that. Choosing to be left behind so your children and grandchildren could live, that's not abandonment, that's sacrifice. And it gets even stranger when you look at infants. In extreme famine conditions, some anthropological studies suggest infanticide occurred far more often than most people realize. Not from cruelty, from impossible math. A mother who already had 2 children to feed, with no fat reserves left in her own body, sometimes faced a choice no person should ever have to make: save the children she already had, or risk losing all of them trying to save one more. This is uncomfortable to even say out loud, but understanding it isn't the same as approving of it. It's about understanding the brutal physics of survival, long before agriculture, before food storage, before modern medicine ever existed. Now, here's the loop back. Remember Shanidar 1? The blind, one-armed Neanderthal who survived for years? His existence proves something important. Early humans were capable of extraordinary compassion, even under the most extreme conditions. So the abandonment wasn't because ancient humans were heartless. It happened because resources, geography, and timing decided who got to keep their humanity intact and who didn't. Some tribes had enough surplus to carry the weak across frozen rivers. Others didn't even have enough food to carry themselves. And the difference between the two often came down to nothing more than which valley they happened to be born into. That's the mystery hiding underneath all of this. It was never really about weakness, it was about location, timing, and luck. A tribe near a fish-rich coastline could afford kindness. A tribe trapped in a freezing mountain pass during a famine simply couldn't. Evolution didn't reward cruelty, it rewarded flexibility. Groups that could adapt, sometimes choosing compassion, sometimes choosing brutal efficiency, survived longer than groups stuck rigidly to just one moral rule. And maybe that's the most disturbing part of all. Morality, as we understand it today, wasn't fixed back in prehistoric times, it bent depending on how close starvation was standing at the door. Today, we live with an abundance our ancestors couldn't even imagine. We get to care for the sick, the elderly, the disabled, without ever having to calculate whether the tribe survives the winter. But for most of human history, that privilege simply didn't exist. Every single person alive today is descended from groups who made those impossible choices, and somehow still carried on. So the next time you see an elderly person struggling to walk, or a parent caring for a sick child without a moment's hesitation, remember this. That instinct to protect the weak almost vanished thousands of times throughout history. And somehow, it survived anyway.